people now. Mommy, brother, everybody get together. Try to love one another right now. We are back with Miss Jen.
Yay.
How are you?
Wow.
Good.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying this series of stories.
Dude, it's very cool. And the other thing is that I really like that color blue too.
Yeah.
I was just, while we were off air, I was telling Miss Jan how I love the color of her shirt. That was my favorite color, blue. But I have to say that Alexander Hamilton background there is pretty nice too. Is that why you chose Alexander Hamilton today, because of that cool blue?
Absolutely not.
That's awesome.
I'm just going through the book. But this is so cool. You know why it's blue like that?
Why?
Because he was born in the British West Indies.
Dude, I did not
you ever
know that.
I didn't know that either.
I don't know anything about this guy.
I thought I knew about the founding fathers.
Yeah.
But this is blowing my mind.
I did.
It's just, there's so much that I didn't know.
Dude.
So I'm really excited about it.
I'm very excited too. Alexander Hamilton.
Alexander Hamilton, an unlikely beginning. Without Alexander Hamilton, the United States might be a very different place. He was George Washington's right-hand man, and his courage and strategic thinking helped win the Revolutionary War. He was also one of the founding fathers, whose ideas helped create the U.S. Constitution, but he came from the unlikeliest of backgrounds. Alexander was born in 1755 on Nevis, a steep volcanic island in the British West Indies, edged with sandy beaches and surrounded by the Caribbean Sea. It was a beautiful place, but a dangerous one, with earthquakes, tidal waves, and violent storms. Pirates sailed the waters on the island and were sometimes caught and hanged at Gallows Bay. Nevis was known as one of the sugar islands because its wealth came from the sugar trade. Trading ships from all over the world sailed in and out of its port, and thousands of enslaved Africans worked and suffered on the plantations there. The number of enslaved people on Nevis was 8 times more than the number of white people. Alexander saw slaves being bought and sold on the auction blocks. His own grandfather, a doctor, used to inspect the people who were being sold into slavery.
Ugh.
Yeah. Alexander's mother owned slaves, and he and his older brother James were masters of a young enslaved boy named Ajax. But Alexander grew up hating the brutality of slavery. It seemed morally wrong that people's lives depended not on their hard work or their abilities, but on the circumstances they were born into. As he grew older, ideas about liberty and freedom became increasingly important to him. I think it's amazing that a person that young and in that situation where he could have just accepted being very privileged.
Right.
But
Would know that it was something.
Yeah.
Wow.
Brilliant kid. Alexander's childhood was difficult.
And a little child shall lead them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good catch.
Yeah.
His parents were not married, which meant that Alexander was illegitimate and remained near the bottom of the island's social hierarchy. He and his brother were called names and forbidden from attending the church school. People were always gossiping about his mother, Rachel. As a 16-year-old, Rachel had been pressured by her mother to marry a much older man she met while visiting relatives on the island of St. Croix. The marriage was unhappy, and after their son Peter was born, Rachel left her husband and child. Furious, her cruel husband had her thrown in jail, hoping this punishment would make her do as he wanted. Instead, when she was released, she ran away to St. Kitts, where she met James Hamilton, the man who would become Alexander's father. I love the hearts in her
that's pretty
eyes.
cool. Yeah.
James Hamilton had arrived in the British West Indies from Scotland. He was from a rich family and had grown up in a castle. But as the 4th son, he would not inherit this wealth. Instead, he hoped to make a fortune in the sugar trade. Unfortunately, he wasn't very good at it. Instead of making money, he got into debt and could not afford a ticket back to Scotland. So he took various jobs, met Rachel, and a few years later, Alexander and his brother were born. The laws at this time were very unfair to women. When Alexander was 4, Rachel's first husband divorced her, Now he was free to remarry, but she was not. Divorce papers described her as shameless, rude, and ungodly. When Alexander was 9, his family moved to St. Croix, where Rachel had been imprisoned. Alexander soon learned about his mother's past. Everyone in town knew her history. His parents' relationship fell apart under the strain, and James Hamilton abandoned his family. Alexander never saw his father again. Rachel was intelligent, resourceful, and hardworking. She rented a house and ran a store on the ground floor. She taught Alexander and hired tutors for him, too. He had more than 30 books, a huge collection at that time, from which he learned history and political philosophy. Alexander had just turned 13 when both he and his mother fell ill with a fever. The doctor treated them and Alexander recovered, but Rachel did not. She died beside him in the family's bed. That same night, only an hour after her death, officials arrived and locked away all of Rachel's possessions. Her money and everything she owned, even Alexander's books, were given to her first son, Peter. Alexander and his brother James could not inherit because they were illegitimate.
Wow.
I know. Alexander and James went to live with a cousin who managed to purchase Alexander's books and return them to him. Sadly, he died soon after. The boys then moved in with their uncle, but in an unbelievable stroke of bad luck, he died as well. What bad times these two boys had,
really?
Right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Alexander's sort of like Jessica Fletcher. Like everywhere he goes, there's like a death.
I don't know.
Whoa.
Jessica Fletcher.
Remember Murder, She Wrote?
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Yeah. You're too young.
All right. Yeah, I'm too young.
No.
All right. Alexander was 14 years old, and his brother James was 16. And in less than a year, they had lost their mother, a cousin, and an uncle. They had no home, no possessions, no money, and no one to care for them.
Wow.
James became apprenticed to a carpenter to learn that trade. Alexander had a good friend named Edward Stevens, whose wealthy family invited Alexander to live with them. Both boys were bright and hardworking. With their red hair and slim builds, they even looked alike. Edward eventually left for medical school in New York, but he and Alexander stayed friends throughout the rest of their lives. By the time he moved in with the Stevens family, Alexander was working as a clerk for a shipping company. He didn't like the job much, but he was very good at it, and it gave him the opportunity to learn about business and trade. When he was 16, the owner went away and left Alexander in charge of the entire company. For 5 months, Alexander negotiated deals, inspected goods, and collected money owed. He was a remarkably capable young man, and this experience only made him dream bigger.
Wow.
Alexander wanted to be successful and famous like the men he had read about in his history books. He was fascinated by duels, which were common at the time, and by ideas about death and honor. Years later, he would die in a duel against the American statesman Aaron Burr. But even as a teen, he desperately wanted to become a hero. "I wish there was a war," he wrote in a letter to Edward, saying that he would willingly risk his life. But it was his talent with words that would become his ticket to a bigger role in the world. He sent a love poem to the local paper, which published it. A Presbyterian minister named Hugh Knox read it and was impressed. Knox reached out to Alexander and they became friends. Knox made his personal library available to Alexander so he could continue his studies.
Wow.
How about that? Can you imagine a boy with just a few books going into a place like this?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Kind of like going to somebody's library.
There you go.
Like
Come on down here.
Yeah. The next summer, when Alexander was 17, the island was struck by a fierce hurricane. The storm uprooted trees and tore homes from their foundations. Boats were thrown onto the shore. The seas rose and huge waves crashed. When the terrifying storm finally ended, the damage was catastrophic. Some people had been killed. Many were injured. Homes and businesses were destroyed. Food and fresh water were in short supply. Shaken, Alexander sought comfort at the church and listened to Hugh Knox give a powerful sermon. Inspired by his words, he wrote a letter to his father. The roaring of the sea and wind, fiery meteors flying about the air, the crash of the falling houses, and the ear-piercing shrieks of the distressed were sufficient to strike astonishment into angels.
That's well said.
Yeah.
Wow.
When Hugh Knox saw the letter, he urged him to publish it, giving Alexander his first taste of fame. Everyone wanted to know who this talented writer was. When they found out he was an orphan with no formal education, they were fascinated. Hugh Knox took advantage of their curiosity and collected money for his young friend's education. Such talent should not be wasted, he said. Enough funds were raised to send Alexander to the United States for college. In the fall of 1772, he boarded a ship and never looked back. After he arrived in New York City, Alexander began spending time with people who thought the United States should be independent from Britain. When Paul Revere rode from Boston to New York, bringing news that the American colonists had boarded British ships and dumped tea into the harbor, Alexander began writing political texts supporting the protest. He wrote about freedom and slavery, as well as the right to liberty. He was still in his teens. Imagine that. But he was already taking the first steps to becoming a revolutionary leader. Over the next few years, Alexander Hamilton took the nation by storm, inspiring others with his fiery words. He joined a volunteer militia to fight against the British in the Revolutionary War, helped ratify the U.S. Constitution, and became the nation's first Secretary of the Treasury. He was committed to building something lasting and just in government, and his legacy lives on today.
It's very interesting.
Do you want to hear the last page?
Yeah,
Right.
definitely.
Many young people fought on the battlefields of the Revolutionary War. In the 1770s, teens were viewed differently than they are now. If you were not a child, then you were an adult. Both the American and the British armies included teenage boys and a few girls, too. One such girl soldier was 16-year-old Deborah Sampson. Pretending to be a boy, Deborah fought against the British for 3 years. Another 16-year-old girl who played an important role was Sybil Luddington. Like Paul Revere, she rode her horse through the night, knocking on doors and alerting the militia to the approach of the British.
Wow, boy, you never hear about the women.
Yeah.
You know, although I had heard of that Deborah Sampson before, because there is one kid's book about her that I think they read in Shaler, like in 3rd grade. I can't remember.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
you should get one for
I
the
know,
next time
yeah,
you do
definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, that's
Very
pretty cool. Now, did you ever see that musical Hamilton?
I haven't seen
I haven't
it yet.
either.
No.
I haven't either. And I
saw
haven't seen
parts
the movie.
of it at one point, but
yeah.
I didn't get to see the whole thing.
Because, like, it was all the rage.
Oh, my
for
goodness,
a while.
yes,
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
why, I have these books.
Yeah,
because
tell
I
us
know
who this
that-
is here, too.
Well, this is a young man who's living now, but he has portrayed Alexander Hamilton in various ways. And so here he is, the making of his
Oh, yeah.
of
The
his
making
story.
of Hamilton.
Yeah. So
That's
in the
wild.
cast, they made a point of having diverse people there in the cast.
That's really cool.
And then, so there's a lot of information in here
About him.
about
Because
him.
a lot of people see him as
And here he is dressed
an activist.
as
There he
as
is.
Hamilton.
Yeah. Very cool. So
I
he
thought that was
brings
cool to see.
Alexander Hamilton
To life.
To life.
Yes,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
our own era.
He'll probably always, no matter whatever he goes on to do after this, like he'll probably always be known as
Oh,
the
yeah.
Hamilton guy.
Oh, yeah.
Like Judy Garland will always be known as Dorothy, even though she was so much more.
She was. Yes.
So much more.
And so is he.
She marched on Washington.
So he
She
has some
was a
other
wonderful actress. Yes.
Yeah, he does have some other things that I didn't go through because it was before In the Heights.
Okay.
A show that he did and became very famous.
And that was
during that. Yeah.
Very cool.
In the Heights.
Well, thank you for getting us interested in Alexander Hamilton.
I'm
now I
so
want to find out
excited.
more. Thank you very much.
So our next group, that was the end of that group.
Okay.
And this next group is child activists fighting for education, freedom, and clean water.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. Well, that's good. Thank you, Miss Jan.
It's always lovely to be here with you and learn. I learn as much as everybody else learns.
Me too, man. And I want to find out more about this dude. Thank you
Cool.
very much.
Yeah, you betcha.
Bye, Miss Jan.